Hello, may I speak to Barry Williams, please?
Speaking.
Hello, Mr. Williams. This is Dean Esme from A Voice for Men calling from the United States.
How are you?
Fine. I know it's a little bit early, but because we said 9:30. But is this a good time?
Yes, it's a good time. Yeah.
Well, I'm honored to speak to you. Now, I don't know if you know much about A Voice for Men.
Well, I've heard about it, but I don't know a great deal about it.
You're not required to, I don't suppose. Just so you know, I'm recording our call, and
Yes.
I'm probably going to edit it a little bit for one of our radio shows. We do several, and one of them is called Domestic Violence Revelations with Erin Pitsey. Erin Pitsey, I don't know if you know who she is. She started the International Battered Women's Refuge movement back in England in the 1970s.
Yes.
I don't think she's spent a lot of time in Oz, but in any case, our show specializes in issues of domestic violence, and even though Erin started her refuge for domestic violence on women, from the very, very beginning, she's always staunchly maintained that domestic violence is absolutely not a gendered issue, that it's something men are as often the victim of as women, and that men need help and services in that area too.
Yes.
I'd say a good 10% or so of our audience is actually from Australia. You know, we're international. I would say most of us are in the United States and Canada, but a good percentage are from Australia, the UK, a few Kiwis, even people from India and parts of Africa. So we do have a worldwide audience. And I'm actually a little ashamed that until you were brought to my attention, I'd never heard of you. Some have actually called you the Erin Pitsey of Australia. So can I ask you a few questions?
Yes, go right ahead.
All right. Can I call you Barry?
Yeah, Barry, yes, that's my name, yes.
Yeah, and I'm Dean.
Good to talk to you, dude.
How old are you, Barry?
I'm into my 60s now.
Are you really?
Yep.
Okay. And can you tell us what first inspired you to become an advocate for men's issues?
Well, I was a young man, had 4 small children, and my wife walked out and left us. She didn't want to be a part of the family anymore. She became an alcoholic, a terrible alcoholic. And, of course, I was in Australia. I'd never heard of a man with 4 small children and a young baby. And even though I was on custody, when it went to court in 1975, I was the first man in Australia to win custody of 4 small children under the New Family Law Act of 1975. But I had a lot of barriers put up in front of me, what they used to call the child welfare. Them days thought it was unusual a man should have children. They didn't want to try to take them off me and everything like that, even though the court had said I was the best person. And I had to fight them. They wanted to put the kids in a home, yet I was sending them to school, feeding them, doing everything that the normal family does. And when the police came, they just told them that it's not right that a man should have the children. So the police turned around and told them if they didn't get off my property, they'd lock them up. So after that, I become, I wouldn't say a hero or anything, but I became a well-respected person in Australia, in the community and that. And I decided, well, there's no support for men. Because when I had an accident, when I won custody of the children, I was driving a transport truck, carting steel and mesh for building of houses. And a piece of steel went through my head, and I ended up suffering, pretty bad and having blackouts and stuff like that. But in them days, there was no help for you in Australia. There was no men's support for men. There was only supporting mum's benefit. It was called a single mum's benefit. So I tried to get the Australian government under the Whitlam government to change it to a supporting parents benefit, and they wouldn't have a bar of it. So I went on a hunger strike for 5 days and 5 nights outside the Parliament House then, and it was when there was a challenge from the Liberal Party, Malcolm Fraser, against Whitlam, and Malcolm Fraser won. And within 2 days of winning, he told me to pack up and go home, and I'll be first to get an appointment with him, which I did. And he said, you're quite right, this is discrimination. We'll introduce what you're asking for and call it a supporting parents pension.
If I can interrupt you for a minute, Barry. You said a few things there that a lot of our listeners aren't going to know because maybe only 10% of our people are Australians. So I hope you'll forgive me if I interrupt a few times.
No, that's fine.
I understand you, at least back in the 70s, were part of major changes in family law and benefit services for men. I'd like to hear a little more from you, if you don't mind, as to what it was. I mean, if you don't mind, you don't want open wounds. You said your wife at the time was alcoholic and abusive. I mean, without wanting to be cruel about it, I think people need to hear when men have experiences like this, because men are afraid to talk about it. Can you tell me a little bit about what you were put through that led to the divorce?
Well, ever since I got out, I married my wife when I was in the army, and then when I got out, we shifted to Queensland and to Canberra. She couldn't do anything without drinking alcohol, and she'd become so abusive. She was bashing the kids and stuff like that, you know, turn around, backhand them and everything like that. And I got hit in the head with a bottle from her and ended up in hospital and stuff like that. There was always aggression, and no matter what you did or how you tried to talk to her, she would always pick up something and slam into you or something like that, and she'd be go away and leave the kids then. She'd be gone for a week, and I'd be trying to work and be no mother or anything. But in the end, I had to tell her she had to leave because she was bashing the kids. The police came a few times and were going to charge her, but in them days, they never heard of violence against men, you know.
Wow. Yeah. Did you face much in the way of scoffing or people laughing at you because your wife was treating you this way?
Well, first when you used to ring the police, they'd say, oh, it never happens, you know, that women don't bash men and stuff like that. But look, not only my family, I've seen it down the line. I mean, I just want to say, but thank goodness my wife ended up getting help after about 5 years now, and she hasn't drank for 25, 30 years, you know. She's a good person. We get on well. I made sure she seen the kids and always did. But through my organisation, look, we get men with broken legs, we get men stabbed, we get men burnt. We run the only men's crisis service in Australia for 3 years, and in the 3 years we had 100 men and 62 children come through that crisis service. And a lot of the men were burnt, they were stabbed, they had broken arms, were put downstairs, everything like that, you know. So we've seen our lot of violence against men too.
None of that surprises me. I am very glad to hear that your ex did get help and that you are on good terms with her now. It seems to me that there was a time even when men were batterers. It was seen as a good thing as they could get help and treatment and get over that, but nobody wanted to give that sort of treatment to women because they didn't believe women needed that sort of help. But some of them do, don't they?
Yes, they do. Well, see, Australia's behind the 8 ball too. We have no men's refuges in Australia. We have, just where I am alone, we have 9 women's refuges. We have men coming in every day battered. We're the biggest organisation in Australia of family law, and probably in what we do, probably around the world, they say. We have 22 branches throughout Australia and 145 volunteers helping people 24 hours a day.
Really?
And that's why we got recognised. We don't discriminate. We're called Lone Fathers Association, but we have nearly a 40% women membership. I have women president in Tasmania, in Bundaberg in Queensland, and in Logan in Queensland running their branches there, and they're reporting violence all the time against men and violence against women. We don't support violence in any shape or form, and we especially don't support violence on children.
Well, ultimately, they're the true victims, aren't they, of all of this?
Yes, well, see, my nephew was a victim. He's dead and in the grave. His partner smashed his head in while he was asleep 5 times, and then she buried him, kept him in a doona for 9 weeks, wrapped upstairs, and then got a backhoe in and buried him. And it took 4 months before the police found where he was in the hole.
Oh, my God, when did this happen?
That was about, I think it was exactly 10 years ago.
And I hate to delve into such a painful thing, but did she try to claim self-defense or such bullshit?
No. She had a history from what we call DOCS, Department of Family Services in Canberra. They were put on the stand and asked by the judge whether he was a violent person, and they said no. But he was always reporting her as violence and bashing him and bashing the kids and stuff like that.
So I'm impressed to hear of the size of your organization and actually embarrassed.
Well, we've done 41 years this year. Well, the organisation's been going 40 years. I've been doing it 41 years.
And it's called the Lone Fathers Association, and it's all over Australia, what you just told me.
Yeah, well, it's called the Lone Fathers Association of Australia, and the opposite status of the family and the opposite status of men and children. And we've got a big office in Canberra where I'm on all the government advisory panels virtually to do with family law in Australia, and I was one of the designers of the child support scheme and stuff like that in Australia, which we designed on the US scheme. I'm a federal lobbyist in the Parliament House, and we do show the government, we have statistics in Australia of and around the world of violence, and it shows men and women are actually equally violent as each other, you know.
Well, I know Erin going to be disappointed that she didn't get to have this conversation with you. She lives in London, so it's much too late for her there, but perhaps one day we'll get you on the show with us so she can talk to you, because she started the world's first battered women's shelter. She more or less started the whole movement, but she's been screaming for years and years and years, it's not a gendered issue. She said of the first 100 women she had in her very first shelter, which was the first in the world, 60% of those women were themselves violent people. And that it's just not a gendered issue, and she's been hated and even persecuted for 40 years for saying this.
Well, we get the same here at times, but fortunately some of our government people are waking up just to the fact that there is violence on both sides. I mean, the women's prisons are full of it in Australia, and many women, violent women and murderers and everything like that, you know.
So you feel the Australian government may have a fairly enlightened attitude about this? Because I've heard very different.
The minute that you try to expose any of it in the media and that, you get extreme feminists entrenched in the government who want to talk down, and every time there's a policy put out in Australia by the government, it's no violence against women and children. They leave out no violence against men too, and this is why I think a lot of people believe that violence is only done by men even now, you know, but it has turned a lot since the early days, say 20 years ago. Men won't report it, that's the problem. Men are ashamed to report that they've been hit or bashed by their wives.
They're embarrassed, either regardless of their politics or their religious views, if they have any at all. It doesn't seem to matter, does it? Men are just ashamed when this happens to them, aren't they?
They are. I mean, I was ashamed. I didn't want to report it at first, but when it was happening with the children and I had to be away at work, I had to start thinking, well, what am I going to do? She could end up hurting one of the children really bad, you know. I mean, I actually seen her just backhand the child on Christmas Day sitting on a stool at the table and just knocked him straight under the table, and he was only about 5-year-old.
Wow. I'm so glad to hear that she's gotten better about those things, but...
Oh, look, she's a wonderful person. She's Aboriginal, and that don't matter. I don't discriminate my children apart Aboriginal, but I seen it within the Aboriginal community too, where they thought it was great to be able to bash their wives, and the wives to be able to hit them over the heads with bottles and everything like that. But that was all through alcohol, you know, and stuff like that in them days. But they've all come a long way. And we have come a pretty long way in Australia, recognising that violence can happen. It's not gender specific, but we have a lot of women entrenched in Parliament. I mean, most women are good women, don't get me wrong. We have a lot of extreme feminists in there who keep vowing if the woman hits back, it's because the man must have started it, you know, and that sort of thing. And that's the way they get out of bringing policies in, like, I have men coming in with children who have their children every day, at least twice a week anyway, trying to get accommodation and that for them and their children. And our government's had no refuges now. Since we lost ours when the Labor government come in, they took it off us and gave it to because the women's refuges screamed that we shouldn't have one. Men have got a refuge, they said, and they pointed out Goulburn Jail. That's one of our biggest jails rather in Australia.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand those words.
Goulburn, Goulburn, Goulburn Jail, is one of our biggest jails in Australia. It's a maximum security jail. And they said, well, see, we run a crisis service, the first one ever in Australia's history. And I decided to walk from Canberra to Sydney to Canberra, which is 300 kilometres, to raise the first money, and the Labor government offered me $600 to run it in them days, and anyway, we got one. $600 to run a crisis service. It was a laugh. Our biggest radio program, John Laws in Australia at the time, he flew into him and said, you know, it's ridiculous. You offer $600 to run a crisis service, yet you just gave women $11,000 to design a surfboard. These men need a crisis service. Well, they lost and the Liberal Party come in and we were given this crisis service for the 3 years, but the minute they lost the game, Labor took it off us and gave it to the extreme feminists. We've never had one since, so that's the history of men's crisis service in Australia, when they can come, where they could come when they were bashed and bleeding and everything like that.
I try to avoid partisan politics.
No,
it is important to be asked. You indicated that the Liberal Party, when they first took power back in the 70s, were at least somewhat supportive of you. And now the Liberal Party is the Labour Party, which is currently in charge of the Australian government, led by Julia Gillard, I believe.
Yep.
You're saying they've been quite unhelpful, unsupportive?
Well, they're unhelpful in this issue. I mean, see, I just got to tell you this, we got shared care laws the same as you had in 1979. You got your shared care laws introduced through California and that. And since then I was putting up a submission every year in Parliament to get it in Australia. Well, we eventually got it under John Howard, but then they couldn't, the Labor government wanted to overturn the shared care laws and they couldn't. So what they did is they introduced a new amendment to the Family Violence Bill. That amendment says you can lie and perjure yourself and you won't be charged. It's working like that now, you know, you've only got to say he's violent. And the police are getting up in the air too, because they have to come out and their law is they must put the male out, whether he's the victim or the aggressor. It doesn't matter if he's the victim, he's got to be put out. They say you've got to protect the mother and the child, and that's the way we're going.
I'll tell you, in the United States, in Canada, and in the UK, it is effectively the same. They will often couch the legislation in gender-neutral terms, but they work on this thing, at least in the U.S. and Canada, they call the Duluth model,
yes,
which they call the primary aggressor. And what it always boils down to is whoever's bigger versus whoever looks most upset. And the bigger one is probably the predominant aggressor, and the one who looks most upset is probably the victim. And that mathematically just means, well, it's the women who are the victim and the men. It winds up being sexist no matter what. And it's biased against women. And get on my soapbox a little bit. You'll tell me if you agree with me or not. I don't think not only do I think this approach fails to help male victims, it actually fails to help many women.
It does. And we tried to adopt the Duluth model, whatever you call it here, you know, but it's actually designed on part of that too. I talked to the police a lot, and the police said to us, we should work with your organisation, because he said, we're getting sick and tired of going up there and seeing a male bleeding. Could have half his eye out or something, but we've got to put it out and to protect the mother and the child. And that's, a lot of police are talking out against it now.
Do you think that was the Liberal Party, you got the Liberal Party's in power now, do you think the Liberal Party was historically problematic in this area, or is this a fairly recent development in Liberal Party politics?
This came in under this Labor government.
I'm sorry, I just said it wrong. I apologize. I'm a Yank. I can't keep my hands straight. Do you think the Labor Party has always historically been bad on this issue, or is this a recent development for Labor?
I think they've always had Labor has always had the opinion that children should be with the mother. And regardless of whether they're the best parent or not. I mean, as I said before, I don't want to talk politics, but we had more success out of a Liberal coalition government in family law amendments than ever. And John Howard, our recent Prime Minister, was the man you could talk to. I got to see to him so many times. We got the family relationship centres introduced through, got the shared care, shared responsibility laws introduced for him and that. And Labor's tried to undo the family relationship centres, but they're definitely trying to undo the shared care laws.
Well, the only thing I would say about that, obviously I'm an American and I don't have a stake in your politics anyway, but I would hope that would be a call for people within the Labour Party and on the political left in Australia to start rethinking, are they truly thinking about the human rights of all human beings? Do they really care about equal rights under the law? I don't think that requires a change of power. I think that requires a change of policy. And hopefully if anybody who's Labour-leaning voter in Australia is listening and thinking, perhaps I'd best talk to my local Labour Party leaders about this.
Well, we try to. I mean, every Prime Minister, I got to see Malcolm Fraser on two or three different occasions rather, but I got to see John Howard on 3 or 4 different occasions. They were both Liberal. You're never allowed to get to see a Labor Prime Minister. And I'm the longest person in Australia doing it. I've never been allowed, and yet I'm a registered federal lobbyist. I don't belong to any party. I'm the only registered federal lobbyist to family law in Australia in the Parliament House. I've made it quite clear that I'm disillusioned with Labor policies, but they stand by their policies.
Well, let's just hope in the upcoming elections that they either change their minds or that voters hear that, because I'm very nonpartisan. Here in the United States, we have the Democrats and the Republicans. I want the Republicans to do a better job. I want the Democrats to do a better job. And I don't care which of them's in power. I just want them to do a better job when it comes to issues like this. And I would imagine you would feel the same way.
Well, that's right. I mean, I have some very good friends within the Labor Party. They're ministers and they hear me out and that, but they don't make the decisions, you know. So it's so bad that I've got an appointment to come up with our Chief Federal Magistrate of Australia on the 25th July to bring to his attention some very biased situations that's causing death and things like suicides and stuff like that. I don't want to go into that gory stuff, but, you know, we're not exempt from terrible suicides over here through family law. We're being accused of violence and child support issues.
Well, yes, in fact, these are gory things, but they should be talked about. We know I've looked into the statistics for Australia, and they're very similar to what you see in the United States and Canada. Males, young men and older men, are 4 times as likely to kill themselves as women, to actually do it. And in the wake of a divorce nowadays, men are 10 times as likely to kill themselves as women are. And if you don't think government policy has something to do with that horrid suicide rate and these horrid stories, I would have to think you're a fool.
Well, see, it's happening around the world now. I've been helping groups set up in Trinidad, Tobago. I'm actually supposed to have been over there now, but I couldn't go. Their government offered to pay my accommodation and fare to go over there and help this group for 9 days, but because it was my daughter's birthday, I would not miss that for the world, you know, so I told them I'd come over later on, but I've been speaking to them, and they were men with no rights, no nothing. They had no rights, no nothing, and now they've got over 200 members, and they've got a politician on their committee and everything, and their tourist minister was going to meet me at the airport, but I just could not say no to my daughter for a birthday, you know.
Well, can't change the world every single day. Let me ask you something. I'm involved in a group, even though I'm an American, I'm involved in a group in Canada. You're leading the world in a way. There is not one single men's domestic violence shelter or refuge. I don't know what you call them there in Australia, shelter or refuge.
Yeah, we call them men's crisis services or men's refuges.
There's none in the entire nation of Canada, which is
there's none in Australia either. They won't do the work we used to do. They won't take fathers unless they got their children with them and everything like that, you know, and stuff like that. And then you can't get into it. They reckon they're always full. It's a heck of a problem out here.
I can feel it. I can hear it in your voice, the frustration. It's frustrating here. A gentleman named Earl Silverman was running the only men's shelter in all of Canada, and he wound up killing himself because he just couldn't get the support he needed to keep it open.
Well, that's happening here too. I'm sorry to butt into you, but I didn't want to come into that. I get called out all hours of the night and day, and to deal with men's suicide because I'm highly trained in it. I'm dealing with the de facto now who her partner took his life over this. He couldn't see his kids and he had orders from the court and everything like to see his kids, but the court can't uphold its orders. And then the child support agent come in and say, well, I'm doubling your pay because you haven't seen your child support because you haven't seen your children for 14 weeks. and I warned the government not to bring these in. And he walked outside and killed himself, you know, and the coroner's about to release the case soon, and I will probably end up in jail because I'm going to talk about it, and I've been warned, we've virtually been warned not to, but I don't care. If it'll stop another man being killed, I'll do it.
Barry, I want you to please keep in contact with us about this. Voice for Men is an international group, and we're trying to shed light on more and more and more stories like this. And we can't be nice about it anymore. We have to be loud.
Well, I wanted to get around to the human rights around the world and just say, do not believe Australia is as good as what they say it is. Human rights are broke here every day, and yet we preach other countries around the world to listen to human rights, yet we break them within the system. That's why I said the Chief Magistrate has agreed to speak to me, because I've told them that I'm going to start abusing them of child abuse if they don't stop this rot and keep blaming men all the time for everything when they're the victims.
The fact of the matter is, Barry, you're not going to get an ounce of disagreement out of me. What's going on here isn't just that these men are being abused and tortured mentally in the cruelest possible ways. This is child abuse.
It is. And as I said to the court and to the politicians, I said, you make the laws. I said, a person goes into the court and gets the right to see his child, and you have signed the rights of the child, so you're actually going with the flow, and you're actually supporting child abuse, and they don't like it, you know.
Well, but they don't have to like it, God damn it. It's the truth. Excuse me for swearing, but we swear on this show.
Oh, that's okay. I don't mind. I do it a bit myself.
The fact of the matter is it's tragic, and it's getting worse. Now, you specifically called out what you called extreme feminists. Now, I'm going to assume, but I'll let you say it, when you criticize feminism, you don't mean you oppose equal legal rights for women.
No, I don't. I support equal rights for women. That's why we're the only group in Australia that I know of that's a big group that allows women. Next to me in the organisation there's a lady of 38 years. She's the treasurer. We've got my vice president's been with us 18 years. The secretary's been with us 15 years. We have women running the branches. We have women have as much say as anyone else. We don't discriminate one bit.
But there are these ideological, I would say, and you could stop me if I'm putting words in your mouth, would you agree there's these ideological feminists who really do seem to fit the stereotype? They hate men.
I always put it this way, there's good feminists and there's extreme feminists, and the extreme ones is the ones that don't believe that men have a right to see their children at all. That's my honest opinion.
They also appear to believe that women can't be violent except in self-defense.
That's right.
And yet, at the same time, isn't that even a sexist view of women? Isn't that treating women like their children?
Thank goodness most women believe that the children have the right to have contact with their children, even in marriage relationship breakdown. The majority believe they have the right. It's a minority that we're talking about that want to keep the gender wars going all the time.
Do you think that most Australian women, or men for that matter, have a hard time believing women are just as violent as men?
I think there is, as I said earlier, I think it is a minority, but growing, rapidly.
That it's growing rapidly, that people won't believe it?
Yes.
And that has to do with political pressures and these campaigns you see?
Well, see, we've even asked the Minister in Australia, the Minister for Women, to stop this business because it's wrong, to stop just using taxpayers' money to say no violence against women and children. It should be no violence against anyone, no violence against the family at all. Taxpayers' money in the millions are being spent on advertisement here. No violence against women and children. We won't accept it.
Well, Barry, we're going to want to help you get the word out on this, and I hope we can talk to you some more.
You can talk to me anytime.
I may also put you in touch with a gentleman named Greg Canning, who does some work with us, and you've already spoken to another guy named Jason who works with us. We're trying to cover these issues everywhere in the world because it's serious, and I don't think it's ever been quite this dire when it comes to the state of men and boys, especially. Not that women don't have problems, of course, but it's bad. But if I could change the subject briefly, we're involved in an effort, I'm involved in an effort to start another men's shelter in Canada in the name of Earl Silverman, who gave up, and we've got some good starts going. Erin has some experience trying to open a men's shelter. She did, although she always had trouble getting it funded, and she has never been able to get people interested. Maybe that can change, but I would know, just from a psychological perspective, do you think that men, like a man, let's say he's, his woman's thrown a pot of boiling water at him and hit him with her car, that sort of thing.
Yeah, it happens here too.
He runs, he takes his children with him. Do you think he has different psychological needs, or needs to be treated somehow different? Not in a moral way, but in a quantitative, how you talk to him way.
I think so, yes, I do. I think men need that little bit of extra to be able to convince them that they're still a good person and it's always not their fault and things like that, Especially some men feel when in Australia here, when they're accused, even though they know they're innocent, they start to think, well, they're guilty themselves, and stuff like that. And they come to us and say, but I feel this way, yet I can honestly say I didn't touch her, I didn't do nothing. She went to stab me and all I did was push her out of the way with a knife, And it goes in the courts here all the time and they say, well, you still pushed it. Didn't worry about her coming at him with a knife that could have killed him, isn't it?
She had the knife, he pushed her away, it's his fault. And not only does he instinctively think something like that, but then the courts act like that must be true.
Yes.
And
yes, we'll see. But usually one can get legal aid in Australia, the other can't. And a lot of people can't afford the barrister, so it's just a terrible cost of it.
It's almost like an industry set to grind men and their children up in some ways. It feels like at times. It sounds conspiratorial, but it seems like it's that way.
It does. And we have got to be stronger and try to get out to try to improve the situation. But see, we lost also, to cut a long story short, I was asked by our Prime Minister to tidy the child support scheme up in Australia because I was the longest person involved in it, and I'm still, since it came into Australia in 1987, I'm still on all the committees and the senior person on it. And we did that. I helped tidy it up, and I got 4 new amendments through, which made it a bit fairer and that. But John Howard then said to me, I'm going to give you an office and we're going to pay for it. They gave me an office and we got applauded all around Australia because I was Australian of the Year 2 of ACT in 2005.
Really?
And, yeah.
Australian of the Year in 2005, and now you can't...
I was Australian of the Year of the ACT, which is Australian Capital Territory.
Okay.
I didn't win the national one.
Well, all right, but in any case, but now they're not listening to you at all.
Yeah, and I got this office, and we were getting $120,000 to run the office, which gave me be able to put a person on 5 days a week. I've never been paid in 40 years. It's all volunteer. And anyway,
You've never been paid in 40 years?
No. I'm a married celibate. That's how I live. In that time when we had the office, we run it, the government changed, coalition lost, and Labor come in. Well, they virtually within no time at all took $66,000 out of our running. So I had to put down the person to 3.5 days a week. He's the only person who gets paid. We're all volunteers, the rest of us, and made it very hard for me to help my branches losing $66,000. And we've got to be very careful how we use our funds and things like that. So we're not a very rich organisation, even though we've got the history and we're well respected around Australia. And I heard when I went to the USA to their big conference in February 2012, we were applauded by 550 delegates there, and I ended up getting an award from President Obama. My organisation did set it.
And yet you come back home and your government is not treating you your organization with much respect anymore.
Well, I think it's happening around the world some countries haven't even got any human rights for men, And I think we need a voice all together to get out there to expose all the myths and try to convince everybody that everyone's equal and it doesn't matter if it's man or woman and violence can happen. It's not gender specific.
It isn't. We call it, at least on A Voice for Men, we call it the Men's Human Rights Movement. And Domestic violence is one of the things that is closest to our heart, but we talk about issues like circumcision, which isn't a thing in Australia, but it's big in other places, and the declining performance of boys in education and the greater unemployment rate among men, especially older men, and the greater suicide rate, and the fact that men have lost the presumption of innocence in court. One of the hallmarks of all the civilization from, the British common law of the United States, presumption of innocence is gone if you're a man and accused by a woman, and how's that a fair go for anybody?
Well, that's it, and the suicide rate in Australia is absolutely shocking.
Mostly men.
We can't all say it's through family breakdown and stuff like that, but a lot of it is through violence. For instance, we had a case here in Australia where the father couldn't see the child, so he threw his child over the bridge and drowned him. And all hell broke loose, and so it should. But 2 weeks before that, a woman strapped a little baby boy to her waist and jumped over the same bridge, and it was all hushed up. And that family emailed me and said, why is this happening? It was her brother or something. And we weren't allowed to talk about it. But now the little Bradley kid the father threw it over the bridge. He's a murderer, he's everything, and the media went wild about it. And they still carry on about it.
So they'll talk about it when a man does it, but they won't talk about it when a woman does it.
Yeah.
When a woman does it, it's just not.
That's it.
It's not a political cause. In an insane world, you would think, again, I'm editorializing, not interviewing, in an insane world, we'd be saying, this is what family breakup and this is what family violence does to people. And and instead, we're pretending it's men oppressing women. Brutal, horrible men and angelic, delicate women, and that demonizes men and infantilizes women, does it not?
Yep.
How can anybody believe in equality and want that to continue going on?
Well, we're getting there, but we've still got a long way to go to get equality, believe me.
Just a change in the attitudes is what's most needed.
Yeah, and I think it should start at high school and start teaching people about the situations and about violence.
Well, it does damage to children's brains and to their psyches their whole lives.
That's it.
It's just the damn truth. What do we need to do about this other than get the word out?
As I said, our politicians, don't matter whether it's Liberal or Labor or whatever it is, they've got to start realising when they're putting out stuff in the media that it's got to be not gender specific, it's got to be about all people. We train up young men, we send them to war, we do everything like that, and we teach them violence and that. And then, the greatest insult that we had, and I put an outcry out of it, when the Vietnam vets come back, they were spat on. Some of them, their marriages broke down very quickly through traumatic stress and everything, and no one wanted to help them. I had a case where a Vietnam vet, had nowhere to stay, so I tried to get him a little place. It was a bit out of Canberra somewhere. The government wouldn't give him nothing. They got to house the refugees before they house our own ex-soldiers, so I had to get him a place, and it was about 26 miles out of Canberra along a little lake called Lake George, and there was a hut out there, so I had to put him in that until we could get him somewhere really where he could stay. So, I'm not trying to denounce Australia or anything like that, but the true facts are that a lot of people around the world don't know what goes on here. As I said before, there's women's refuges, women's shop fronts, women's legal services. We don't have any of that for men. Only groups like us who want to give their time voluntarily.
This arguably doesn't even do justice to women because it coddles them.
It doesn't, and a lot of women put outcries about it. The women we've got in this association get up and tell the government, you've got to start treating men properly as you're treating us. But there seems to be built in some of these, I don't know the word, but to get back at men, I don't know why, and unfortunately, some of them get into Parliament.
No, we see
our own Prime Minister is denouncing the opposition leader, saying that he's going to do all this against women. There'll be no women in Parliament and everything. And that's complete lies. He's a man, a family man, and got daughters and everything like that. And I actually know the man, Tony Abbott, and he's a damn good bloke. He's a strict Catholic and a damn good bloke, and he doesn't put up with any sort of violence or anything like that. Politics just drives a lot of it.
It's hateful. I'd have to say that sort of attitude is just hateful, and it's poisonous and it hurts the relationships between men and women. Sometimes I'm mystified by it too, but it's not different in Australia, in the United States. It's not. Even when we have these gender neutral laws, they're written in gender neutral language, but then they're interpreted by the courts and
That's it.
the police and in a completely non-gender neutral way, and it's hurting a lot of people. But do you have anybody at the Lone Fathers Association who's computer savvy enough to use something called Skype?
Oh, we do. My secretary, Ken, but she's in Brisbane. I'm not a wizard on computers or anything like that.
Well, I mean, I would just like to get somebody in your organization who's relatively unshy about talking. Would also be like a media contact for us on A Voice for Men. We do have an Australian correspondent, but, obviously it's all volunteer.
Go ahead. I've got Skype here, but I haven't set it up. I can get it set up. It'll take me probably a week or more, but I can get someone to come in and set it up. And that.
Can they get it set up with a camera?
I think we could do that, yeah.
Because we could probably line up to get do an interview. I've already done some interviews. Okay, what I'm going to do is send to you an interview that I did with Aaron Pitsey back in December, and that's resulted in us going a lot of places. It would be neat to get a video interview with you, and it's also cheaper to talk over Skype. It's completely free.
Yeah.
So, I'm paying by the minute to talk to you now. But,
gee, I'm sorry about that.
No, that's all right. You're worth it. In fact, one of our Australian editors threw some money at me so I could make this call. I'm going to send you this link so you'll see it. The sound quality is not the best, but you'll get to know who Aaron is. We need to be networking, not just nationally, but internationally. These issues are affecting countries all over the world. We have this horrible notion that men are evil brutes that are oppressing women, and that's not serving men, women, or children well. We're trying to help set up shelters in the United States. We're trying to help set them up in Canada. And I think the more people know, and the more people in this movement who know each other, the better.
Yep.
I'll maybe send you a couple of more emails. I've just sent you the one. Maybe I'll send you an episode of the radio show we've done as well. Maybe we could set something up to talk some more sometime soon, eh?
Yeah, well, I'll start as early as it's Thursday here. I've got to get an IT person in to do some work for them. So I'll get this hook up the Skype I've got.
I will look forward to talking to you again. Thank you so much for your time, Barry.
And thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you.
Have a good one, sir.
Thank you. Bye.